Dean Martin was quietly having dinner when 3 Mafia members made the mistake of threatening him at his table. What happened next shocked everyone in the restaurant. Dean's fist sent one mobster flying through the window, proving the King of Cool was also the King of Punch. It was a Tuesday evening in March 1965, and Dean Martin was enjoying what he thought would be a quiet dinner at Rao's, an upscale Italian restaurant in Las Vegas that was known for its discretion and its ability to provide privacy for high-profile clients. Dean had chosen Rao's specifically because it was the kind of place where he could eat in peace without being bothered by fans or photographers. Dean was sitting at his usual corner table, having finished an excellent osso buco and working on his second cup of espresso, when he noticed 3 men in dark suits being seated at a table across the restaurant. Something about their presence immediately put Dean on alert. They had the look of men who were used to intimidating people, and they kept glancing in his direction with obvious interest. Dean Martin had spent enough time in Las Vegas to recognize the type. These weren't tourists or business executives. They were enforcers, the kind of men who worked for people who preferred to have their problems solved through intimidation rather than negotiation. For the first 20 minutes, the 3 men kept to themselves, ordering drinks and speaking in low voices while occasionally looking toward Dean's table. Dean tried to ignore them and enjoy his meal, but his instincts, honed by years of navigating the dangerous undercurrents of Las Vegas entertainment, told him that trouble was coming. The trouble arrived when the largest of the 3 men, a heavy-set guy with scarred hands and cold eyes, stood up from his table and walked directly toward Dean's corner booth. "Mr. Martin," the man said, his voice carrying a Brooklyn accent and an undertone of menace. "My name is Vincent Torino. We need to have a conversation." Dean looked up from his espresso without changing his expression. "I don't recall making an appointment, Vincent." "This isn't the kind of conversation that requires an appointment," Vincent replied, sliding uninvited into the booth across from Dean. "This is the kind of conversation that happens when certain people want to make sure you understand certain situations." Dean's demeanor remained completely calm, but those who knew him well would have recognized the subtle tension that appeared around his eyes, a sign that Dean Martin was shifting from entertainer mode into something much more dangerous. "What kind of situations?" Dean asked quietly. Vincent leaned forward across the table. "The kind of situation where you've been making friends with people you shouldn't be making friends with, people who aren't good for business in this town." Dean knew immediately what Vincent was referring to. Over the past several months, Dean had become friendly with several local business owners who were trying to operate legitimate establishments without paying tribute to organized crime families. Dean had even invested in a few of their ventures, helping them stay independent of mob control. "I choose my own friends, Vincent," Dean said calmly, "and I don't ask permission from anyone about where I spend my money." Vincent's expression hardened. "Maybe you should start asking permission, Mr. Martin, because the people I work for don't like it when celebrities interfere with business arrangements that have been in place for a long time." By now, Vincent's 2 companions had also approached Dean's table, flanking the booth on either side. The restaurant's other patrons were beginning to notice that something was happening, but most were pretending to focus on their own meals while straining to overhear the conversation. "Here's how this is going to work," Vincent continued, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You're going to stop investing in businesses that compete with our operations. You're going to stop encouraging other people to think they can operate independently in this town. And you're going to start showing proper respect for the people who really run Las Vegas." Dean Martin had been threatened before, but never so directly and never in such a public setting. What made this threat particularly dangerous was that Vincent wasn't just talking about Dean's business activities. He was talking about controlling Dean's personal choices and friendships. "And if I don't agree to your suggestions?" Dean asked, his voice still calm but carrying a new edge. Vincent smiled without warmth. "Then you might find it difficult to continue your career here in Las Vegas. Accidents happen to people who don't understand how things work. Sometimes accidents happen to their families too." The mention of Dean's family was the moment that everything changed. Dean Martin had spent his entire career avoiding confrontation, using his charm and intelligence to navigate around problems rather than through them. He was famous for his cool demeanor, his ability to diffuse tension with a joke or a well-timed exit. Most people who knew Dean had never seen him lose his temper, much less resort to violence. But the combination of being threatened in public, having his business choices challenged, and hearing an implied threat against his family triggered something in Dean that shocked everyone who witnessed what happened next. "Vincent," Dean said quietly, "I think you just made a very big mistake." Vincent was still smiling when Dean Martin's right fist connected with his jaw in a punch that had 49 years of Ohio working-class power behind it. The sound of the impact echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Vincent's head snapped back with such force that he was lifted completely out of his seat in the booth. His body flew backward across the restaurant, crashed through a large window that faced the street, and landed in a heap on the sidewalk outside. The explosion of breaking glass was followed by absolute silence in the restaurant. Every patron, every waiter, every busboy stood frozen, staring at the hole where the window used to be, and then at Dean Martin, who was sitting calmly in his booth, as if nothing had happened. Vincent's two companions stared in shock at the shattered window, then at Dean, then back at the window. They had clearly expected Dean to be intimidated by their boss's threats, not to respond with sudden devastating violence. "Anyone else want to discuss my business arrangements?" Dean asked conversationally, looking at the two remaining mobsters. The men looked at each other, then at the hole in the window, then back at Dean. Without saying a word, they turned and walked quickly toward the exit, stepping carefully around the broken glass as they headed for the street to check on their unconscious associate. The restaurant remained silent for several more seconds before the normal sounds of conversation and dining gradually resumed. But every person in the restaurant was now stealing glances at Dean Martin, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed with the smooth, sophisticated entertainer they thought they knew. Dean calmly finished his espresso, left money on the table for his meal and a generous tip for the window replacement, and walked out of the restaurant as if nothing unusual had occurred. But word of what had happened at Rayo's spread through Las Vegas like wildfire. Within hours, every major player in the entertainment and gambling industries had heard the story of how Dean Martin had sent a mobster flying through a window with a single punch. The story grew with each telling, but the basic facts remained the same. Dean Martin, the king of cool, had proven that behind his sophisticated image was someone who could handle himself in a fight and who would not tolerate being threatened, especially when his family was mentioned. Vincent Torino, it turned out, had suffered a broken jaw, a concussion, and several cuts from the broken glass. He was taken to the hospital and kept overnight for observation, but he never filed a police report about the incident. More significantly, Vincent and his associates never bothered Dean Martin again. Word went out through the Las Vegas underworld that Dean Martin was not someone to be messed with, and that anyone who thought his smooth public image meant he was weak should reconsider their assumptions. Frank Sinatra, when he heard about the incident, was both amazed and impressed. "I always knew Dean was tough," Frank told friends, "but I never knew he could punch like that." Vincent Torino is not a small guy, and Dean sent him through a window like he was throwing out the trash. The incident changed how people in Las Vegas viewed Dean Martin. While he remained the smooth, charming entertainer who made everything look effortless, there was now an understanding that Dean's coolness masked something much more formidable. Restaurant owners throughout Las Vegas began treating Dean with even more respect and deference. The story of his explosive response to being threatened became part of Las Vegas folklore, and it established Dean as someone who commanded respect, not just because of his fame, but because of his willingness to back up his principles with action. Dean himself rarely spoke about the incident, but when asked about it directly, he would simply say, "Some conversations require a different kind of punctuation." The punch at Rouse also marked a turning point in Dean's relationship with organized crime in Las Vegas. While he had previously navigated around mob influence through charm and careful diplomacy, the incident established that Dean Martin was not someone who could be pushed around or intimidated. After the window incident, recalled one Las Vegas insider, nobody tried to pressure Dean about anything. They realized that underneath all that cool sophistication was someone who grew up tough and never forgot how to handle himself in a fight. The broken window at Rouse was repaired within days, but the impact of what had happened there lasted much longer. Dean Martin's reputation as someone who combined sophistication with sudden devastating toughness became part of his legend in Las Vegas. Years later, Vincent Torino would tell friends that getting punched by Dean Martin was like being hit by a freight train driven by a gentleman. He admitted that he had completely misjudged Dean's character and had learned to respect the difference between being smooth and being weak. The incident at Rouse revealed something important about Dean Martin's character, that his famous coolness was a choice, not a limitation. When the situation required it, Dean could shift from charming entertainer to dangerous opponent in an instant. But perhaps most importantly, the incident demonstrated Dean's absolute commitment to protecting his autonomy and his family. He had built his career on being able to make his own choices about his friendships, his investments, and his professional relationships. When someone threatened to take that autonomy away, Dean responded with a violence that shocked everyone who witnessed it. The punch heard round Las Vegas became part of Dean Martin's mythology, proving that the King of Cool was also someone who could handle himself when cool wasn't enough. It showed that behind the martini glass and the smooth vocals was a man who had grown up tough and never lost the ability to defend himself and the people he cared about. Dean Martin's explosive response to being threatened at Rouse sent a message that echoed throughout Las Vegas for years. You could try to intimidate the smooth entertainer, but underneath was someone who could throw a punch that would send you flying through a window and into the street. The incident proved that sometimes the most sophisticated response to a crude threat is a perfectly executed right cross that leaves no room for misunderstanding. If this story of unexpected toughness and explosive self-defense moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who understands that being cool doesn't mean being weak, and that sometimes the most elegant response is the most direct one. Have you ever seen someone surprise everyone with hidden toughness? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check out our other videos about the moments when celebrities proved they were tougher than anyone expected.